I'm Charles Miranda, reporting live from Ukraine.
The Russian invasion of Ukraine has begun.
The first major city has fallen under Russian military control.
When we finally got across the border, I think that the first thing that struck me was it was organised chaos on the Polish side, and there were a lot of forces there, Polish border forces, police, military. Once you got over to the other side, it was chaotic. There were Ukrainian border guards, they had riot shields and canes, and they were beating people back as tens upon tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands were pushing to get out.
As you can see behind me, there's huge crowds. Literally tens of thousands of people have just stepped off a train from Kiev. They're here in Lviv looking for salvation, looking for a way to get to the west. It's quite chaotic scenes. There's literally thousands of refugees who have just come across the border. They come in waves, there's buses over here.
It was completely full on. There were fights that broke out. Just before we got there was a stabbing. And this is all at the border post. This is not anywhere else. This is literally in that zone where you cross the border. There was stabbing, there were fights. People were pulling people apart. The greatest challenge was fuel and getting around. So yes, if you could find a car, good, and there were plenty of cars. There were cars abandoned all over the roads because the fuel had run out. I remember on one occasion I lined up at a petrol station just outside of Kyiv, and I lined up there for an hour, and our car just came onto the skirting, so onto the concrete. We were way down the track, onto the concrete of the petrol station, and they have these boards that signal where the petrol tanks are, how much flow there is, and of course went tick, 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 empty, 0.000, that was it. And a guy comes out and yells, that's it for fuel, obviously in Ukrainian.
Just in a bunker now. It must measure 4 by 6 meters maybe.
Bomb shelters were part of the course. Didn't matter where you were in that country, you lived with the knowledge that you would spend several hours a day in an air raid shelter, in a bomb shelter. That was just yet another challenge to deal with. I guess you were sitting somewhere, or you were in your hotel in a bed, and the alarms would normally go between 2 and 4 a.m. So between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning, you would hear the sirens go off, and they're going off around the town. You'd look out, buses would stop, everyone would stop, they would get out, they would abandon what they were doing. In my case, if I was in the hotel room or the bedsit house that we were staying in, you'd put on 5 layers of clothes because it was -9 outside. You'd run down the street, you'd find the local school or high school where people were getting ushered in, and you'd go 2 stories underground, and you would sit there at times for 5 or 6 hours. I guess that was one of the difficulties, I guess, for everybody, including the Ukrainians, and it did play on your mind because you were just hearing the wail of the siren, but you were also then waiting for the thud, and we would hear the thud, kaboom, 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 and you were trying to estimate how far away that was, and it was anyone's guess. People were looking on phones trying to get information, but the information flow was quite slow because it was an evolving situation. And it played on your mind for sure. You thought, well, the thud, is it getting closer? Like lightning, like a kid counting lightning as he sleeps, is it getting, or the thunder, is it getting closer, the thunder, or is it getting further away? And you try and judge that. It was one of those, I guess, one of the more modern large-scale conflicts that we'd had. I can't remember another conflict where you would have drone footage of a column of tanks about to lay siege to a city, and we had that. We had columns of tanks that were being shot out of the air by the drones, and that footage was being made available immediately by both the Russians' forces and the Ukrainian forces. It was incredible. I remember getting lost in one city, and I brought my phone out to get the maps. And the guy in front of me had done the same thing. He was a local. He got his phone smashed out of his hands by a soldier with a weapon who then smashed his phone. And the guy was just like, I'm about to ring my wife. It was that heightened tenseness, I guess, for want of a better term, in those cities. And it was all around social media and its use and how it was being used. One of the things that came out fairly early on was a leak from the Russian military. Whether it was leak authorised or otherwise, we'll never know. But it basically said to target journalists doing their jobs in the field. The perception was that any journalist working for the foreign media or working with the Ukrainians were an enemy of the state. We were propagandists working for Western powers, and therefore that made us legitimate targets. Now we know that's against every Geneva Convention rule that there is to target journalists, but that was a genuine fear. So all of a sudden we were going incognito. You stripped your car back, you might have had a media pass before, you kept that very much hidden. We downgraded our car. I had the biggest old rusty Chevrolet you've ever seen, and it was lime green. It really stood out, but it stood out for the right reasons, in that it was, who the hell would be driving that car through a war zone? It was clunky. It made us, I guess, it put us at greater risk because that car was old and was dying at stages. Things were falling off it as we drove. I think really looking at the mothers with their children, and they all seem to have multiple children in pushes or holding babies or prams. And it was just the look of absolute abject despair in their faces. Some of them were highly emotional and crying. People wanting to know where Dad was. Dad was about to board a train, and these are civilian dads. These aren't troops. These are normal dads. But he's about to board a train to go to the front line to fight. And I'm sure you've all seen that footage of Dad's hand up against the window off the train, is inside the child's hand on the other side of the window, and the tears from both parties. I mean, to see that live, to be present for that, I mean, it's a highly emotional. I'm getting emotional now even talking about it, but that stuck with me. I think they were harrowing scenes. There's no doubt about it. And yes, we can talk about the wounded. The guys with shrapnel marks that shredded their face that were you were seeing, the guys on crutches missing limbs. Yeah, that is all harrowing as well. But I really think it was the civilian populace that affected me the most, and to see what they were going through and likely to go through now for a few more months, if not years.